Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Norm again, hopping and bopping to you over the airwaves, assuming you're on a wireless device. Otherwise, I may be hopping and bopping to you over a Cat 5 or 6 cable where applicable. Regardless of the method of the hop and bop transmission, welcome to another episode of the Normcast. We are, I was going to say that we're deep into the heart of video game news season right now, but that's not really true. We're about ankle deep in video game news season, but there is video game news happening. More will be hitting in about 5 or 6 days. But video game news is occurring all around us, and we're going to skim over some of that. And we're going to start by talking about kind of a follow-up from our Redfall discussion a couple weeks back, because there actually have been some developments on that front. We have learned some information that was previously only speculated on. So, yes, this past week, Bloomberg published an article by Jason Schreier. If you follow video game news at all, you probably already know Jason Schreier's whole deal, which is investigative poop scooper. The man has published quite a few exposés on companies ranging from Bethesda to Activision, Quantic Dream, Rockstar, a lot of behind-the-scenes drama, unethical business dealings, crunch culture, union busting. Not the sort of man you'd ever want to confide in off the record. In point of fact, having seen him talk on video, he comes about as close to embodying the movie trope of the mean-spirited tech specialist as I have ever seen. The absolute nerd in the back of the room that's rude to everybody and nobody actually likes him, but he's also indispensable to the operation. Basically, he doesn't seem like he'd be that fun in real life, but he's got a very proven track record. And more to the point, he's got some very good informants, so when he reports something, it's usually pretty trustworthy. And anyway, this past week, Bloomberg published a piece by him looking into why Redfall launched as Redfall did. Redfall from Arcane Studios is now, as noted, the studio's worst reviewed game. Panned soundly on Metacritic. We'd probably still be talking about it more heavily in the gossip cycle if the absolutely reprehensible Gollum game did not come out and steal its crappy game thunder. I imagine there was a lot of silent gratitude emanating out of Arcane Austin towards the makers of Lord of the Rings Gollum after those reviews hit. Anyway, Redfall, unmitigated disaster. And for Xbox at least, definitely one of the worst timed disasters because Redfall represented the first of the new-gen console exclusives. In fact, if I am recalling correctly, this is actually the first of Xbox's first-party games to come out at a full $70 price point. Which, granted, most people are playing it on Game Pass if they're playing it at all. I think daily concurrent user numbers have already fallen down into the triple digits, which is not great. But yeah, a bad look all around, and a lot of people, when this game came out, were really looking for some answers because it came out of Arcane Austin. Arcane, the studio that had most recently released Prey, which was a fantastically well-reviewed game. Didn't sell well because people are terrible, but Arcane was a much-respected studio, critically acclaimed for its deep single-player games. And so when they and Microsoft dropped this turkey on the world, a lot of people had trouble wrapping their heads around it. They could not understand how a studio of that caliber made a game of this caliber. Well, the Bloomberg article shed some light onto that process, and it is... well, it's pretty much what I speculated in the Redfall video, and I'd like to take credit for that, but the truth of the matter is it's also what everybody was speculating pretty much all the way back to when Fallout 76 came out, to a fairly similar level of disdain. Basically, as described in the article, Arcane's parent company, ZeniMax, was looking to sell themselves, the company. That would be ZeniMax, the business arm, Bethesda, the publishing arm, and all of the associated studios like Bethesda Game Studios, id, Arcane. Anyway, decision by the suits, the money men, and one thing that has been sadly true about Arcane through the years, despite their high and, until Redfall, almost pristine critical reception, their games usually undersell, and that's actually been an issue through quite a few of Bethesda's companies. Bethesda Game Studios, the ones behind Skyrim, Fallout, their games have usually bucked that particular trend. They are consistent high sellers, But for the other studios, like id, maker of Wolfenstein 2 did not sell great. Tango Gameworks, the makers of The Evil Within, that one didn't go over that well. And especially Arcane, whose games have always consistently scored, in the 80s and 90s on the critical score, their games have criminally undersold. It is an absolute travesty that all of the games that they've made in the past, almost none of them have truly been embraced by the public. Probably their best success in terms of infiltrating the public mindset was the Dishonored series, and even that has underperformed at the market. Anyway, this is back in the 2017-2018 era. ZeniMax has this portfolio of studios who do great work but don't sell very well, and then at the same time, the industry is seeing great success for games in the games as service model. Battle Royale games, games like Fortnite, multiplayer games with microtransactions, recurring long tail opportunities for the gaming public to give the game more money. And so ZeniMax leadership basically, now the article says it was not an absolute mandate, but that the higher-ups were heavily pushing for live service, multiplayer games, microtransactions to be a focus in all the studio's new games. And I imagine that was handled with about the same level of delicacy as a man in an alley telling you that it's not mandatory, but he strongly feels that you should hand over your wallet. Anyway, yeah, from the suit side, this was a foolproof plan. Everybody's playing these multiplayer games, they're pumping a lot of cash into the ecosystem. If the ZeniMax studios leverage the beloved Bethesda properties, they can turn a quick buck, inflate the company's value, and get a higher price from whoever buys them. In short, this was the process that led to, obviously, Fallout 76, the ill-received Wolfenstein Youngblood, and ultimately Redfall. Now, in fairness, Microsoft did end up buying the company, so whatever tactic they had, it did clearly work to some extent. I think the purchase price was in the $7 to $8 billion range. So from a cash perspective, maybe that worked out. But undeniably, this series of decisions led to the worst batch of games that the Bethesda studios ever made. Now, as bad as the situation was, there were several unique elements to Arcane's predicament. The biggest one in relation to what's affecting the current news cycle is that a good half of Redfall's development happened after Microsoft purchased the studio. Now, the actual development woes, such as they were, pretty much mirrored the ones that we heard about on Fallout 76. These were single-player developers who were kind of mandated to make a game not simply in a genre they didn't have a lot of experience in, but also in a genre that none of them actually really liked. These were single-player devs. They were used to working in a single-player action RPG sort of environment. The article details that the leadership didn't really know where they wanted to go with this type of game. The company was understaffed compared to other live service studios, and a significant number of the developers working on the game literally just did not want the game to happen. To the extent that they were hoping that when Microsoft bought out the company, and when they saw what they were making, they might extrapolate from Fallout 76's difficulties, see the state of the game, and according to the article, quite a few of the developers were hoping Microsoft would cancel the game outright, or possibly let them retool that as a solely single-player game, something back on comfortable ground. But as we know, Microsoft took a kind of hands-off approach on this one, ultimately to the game's detriment. Now, right now, there is a lot of talk going around about Microsoft's current hands-off policy in regards to its studios, its newly acquired studios. And I grant, in this particular case, very particular case, Microsoft really should have done something. They should have gone in and just killed the game outright. But I urge strong caution for everybody who is saying that Microsoft should be more involved on this, because in this particular instance, this is not a case of a game going off the rails because the developers decided to follow their own bliss. It wasn't because of hands-off management. It actually was from executive interference. That was the cause of the entire problem. If Arcane had been free to follow their own path, I guarantee you their game would not have been Redfall, at least not the Redfall that we got. They were given a dumb mandate by a money-grubbing suit and were duty-bound to follow it. You know what other companies in the past have had money-grubbing executives giving dumb mandates that killed studios? Microsoft. Look at what happened to Lionhead. Left to their own devices, I imagine we'd have already been up to like Fable 5 or 6 right now. We may have even gotten like a Black and White 3. Instead, studio interference meant that they got forced to turn the Fable series into a testing ground for their failed Kinect technology, and ultimately, does this sound familiar to anybody? A crappy multiplayer experience, which apparently was so crappy that it was just killed outright, along with the studio. Anyway, the article goes into more depth. If you're interested, check it out. It's getting a lot of coverage from the gaming press right now, but I just want to caution anyone here whose takeaway from this article and from the situation in general is that Xbox management needs to be stepping in more. I do think that they need to be more cognizant of actual disasters in this particular case, but remember, there are only a few times when the interests of executives and gamers align. Anyway, the whole situation is pretty depressing. Not going to follow that anymore. Like I said, it's a good article. Check it out if you're curious. Oh, last thing here, just from the article, just because I did not address it earlier. The real tragedy of this situation is that according to the article, approximately 70% of the staff of Arcane Austin who worked on Prey are no longer with the company. This largely because these were skilled and veteran single-player makers who had no interest in developing a multiplayer game. Redfall wasn't just bad, it gutted the studio. Anyway, the situation sucks. Moving on. The big video game shows are still to come. I think we're going to go ahead and relegate the PlayStation Showcase into the minor leagues this year. Sorry, no disrespect intended, but I watched the show and I'm afraid you're going to have to work a little harder to earn your place back at the adult table. But on the subject of minor league game shows, Meta had its Meta Gaming Showcase this past week as well. This being obviously the showcase for the Meta Quest virtual reality headset. Now, the Meta Quest 2, being as it is a standalone virtual reality headset, occupies a weird spot in the gaming pantheon because it is effectively a mobile device and thus somewhat underpowered. Although getting more powerful every day, it's again, virtual reality is a very strange, very complex animal because, technologically speaking, because the specifications don't really tell the whole story. There are targets that VR games need to hit in order to maintain a baseline of comfort and non-nausea for the players that require higher resources than 2D games, and because it's an entirely different optimization path, the numbers rarely tell the full story. Anyway, because it is such an odd duck, it does kind of occupy a different space at this time than the gaming mainstream, and I would include even the PlayStation VR 2 in that. It would be more closely associated with the PlayStation ecosystem for obvious reasons. But I personally am quite a VR enthusiast. I do actually use my Quest 2 pretty much daily, more for social applications than for gaming. But I do game on it, and I did actually see a couple of notable announcements coming out of the Meta Quest Gaming Showcase. I'm not going to do a rundown of the showcase. We don't have time, and I don't think that the audience would really find that all that interesting, being as VR remains a bit of a niche market, because you guys don't know what you're missing. VR is awesome. But okay, here we go. The first one is that Meta Quest has announced the Meta Quest 3, the upcoming consumer-level VR headset. The Quest 2 has been incredibly successful, did great numbers through both of the past two holiday seasons. The Quest Pro, which was released this past year, bombed terribly for obvious reasons, because that one was priced somewhere in like the $1,500 range for essentially the same Quest 2 experience with better pass-through. But the Quest 3 appears to be more of a return to form with a slightly upgraded resolution on the optics, twice the GPU power, which I'm actually really happy about that one. I hope they do get some things that really take advantage of it, because while GPU advances in the 2D sphere, like on your PlayStation, your PC, are really only giving incremental changes to the end product. That is, right now, if you had a 3D model in a AAA game and you doubled the polygons on that, you probably wouldn't even see it now. In the 2D sphere, resolutions are high enough, models are already high enough poly that pushing that bar doesn't really change it that much. But in VR, because it is such a resource-intensive machine, any major change is felt palpably. This is like the difference between a PlayStation 1 and a PlayStation 2. It will be a noticeable difference. The other big improvement for the Meta Quest 3 is going to be a color pass-through option, just similar to what was on the Quest Pro. There is currently on the Quest 2 a black and white pass-through option, which, I mean, it functions well enough if you need to turn it on and go walk to the bathroom or something, but the black and white footage is very grainy. If you hold up your phone, you wouldn't be able to make out any of the lettering on it. That apparently is changing significantly with the Meta Quest 3. There will be color pass-through option, and the reason for that is going to be a large focus on mixed reality experiences where you are getting virtual objects mapped onto real surroundings. Personally, I prefer straight VR to AR at this point, but I can certainly see where incorporation of functional, reasonable quality pass-through could have some useful application. The one big disappointment of the Meta Quest 3 announcement is that it looks like they are still going to be using LCD lenses instead of OLED, and that is it's a crying shame because the Quest 1 used OLED lenses, and those black levels made such a difference on VR night scenes or low light scenes. It's certainly understandable with them wanting to keep the price still in the $500 range, but it is a crying shame. So far as the showcase itself, it was reasonable. I mean, to be completely honest, on the whole, I had about the same level of hype as I got out of the PlayStation showcase, which isn't great, but for a much smaller ecosystem as the Quest VR headset is, it was reasonable. I'm not expecting anything fantastic out of it, because, again, for effective performance at this point, you're talking about glorified mobile phone gaming. This is not PC VR, this is standalone VR using a mobile chipset. With that said, they have run impressive demos before. There are some visually attractive, if not necessarily technically impressive games on the Quest 2 right now. I do hope that situation will improve on the Quest 3, but I digress. Let's get back to the games. The games that I found interesting, I'm just going to give you a couple of them here. Like I said, not really a general interest show yet. But an exciting announcement for me specifically. It looks like Power Wash Simulator is getting a VR port to the Quest 2. Which is wonderful. I don't know if you've played Power Wash Simulator. It's on Game Pass if you have not and want to give it a shot. It is exactly what it says. It is a power wash simulator, and it is a deeply satisfying experience. You are provided a filthy car or a building or something along those lines. You have your power washer and you wash it. And having said that out loud, I realize this is going to come across as a bit of a tough sell. The truth is that gameplay-wise, this is very much a game in the vein of other boring task simulators like Lawn Mowing Simulator or Bus Simulator. But what does actually set Power Wash Simulator apart is that the mechanics are, one, they are very satisfying in and of themselves, but also the game has a sense of humor. It actually has a personality, which is not something you usually get with this type of game. I don't want to generalize, but generally when someone sets out to create a game like Desk Drawer Organizer 2000 or Aquarium Cleaner Simulator, the type of person who sets out to create that kind of game, I mean, not to be cruel, but they don't come across as the life of the party. And while Power Wash Simulator is mechanically similar to that kind of game, in execution as you go along through the story mode of Power Wash Simulator, it does have a story mode, you go from cleaning houses and cars to plot points involving UFOs and time travel and ancient temples. There's more than just the cleaning. And it is, again, a very satisfying power wash cleaning experience. Now, as for how it's going to translate to the lower-powered Quest 2 system, I mean, obviously Power Wash Simulator is not really pushing the envelope for technical prowess, but you do have to be pretty conservative when designing for the Quest 2 chipset. Anyway, it's supposed to be launching sometime this year, so I will be looking out for that. The other announcement that I found interesting in the Quest showcase was they are going to be releasing a VR remake of The Seventh Guest, which is going to excite probably two two of you if you're old enough to remember it, but it was one of the first major CD-ROM-based adventure games, point-and-click adventure games. The original had a lot of full-motion video and puzzles. This one is using volumetric motion capture for the video elements, which could be neat, and I will definitely be looking into that, if for nothing more than nostalgia factor, when it also launches sometime this year. Anyway, it looks like we're running out of time, so let's see if we can close this off with a few more interesting facts. Did you know that on average, your brain, that is the human brain, I can't speak about yours specifically, but the human brain uses 10 watts of power, which quite frankly is pretty efficient. That also means that if anybody ever refers to you as a dim bulb, don't get angry, because if we're talking about old-fashioned incandescents, they're technically correct. Finally, can you guess which exotic location has more caves than anywhere on Earth? The answer is far-off, exotic Kentucky. Yes, thanks to Kentucky's unique geologic makeup, which includes a lot of porous limestone, the landscape is just really conducive to having caves eaten out of rock. Does this preponderance of caves within Kentucky's borders mean that they harbor a higher than average number of horrible cave monsters? Yes, it does. Be careful when traveling. Anyway, that is all the time we got for today. I thank you very much for making it all the way to the end of this episode. If you enjoyed the content here, please like, comment, subscribe, do comment, weigh in with your opinions, and let your voice be heard among the screaming rabble. Be sure to hit the notification button so you don't miss the next episode. And if you want to take a more active part in the support of content along these lines, as well as other comics, games, etc., then support us directly on our Patreon page. Link is in the description. Otherwise, I thank you very much for joining us today. We will be back very soon with another episode, because we are getting into the video game news season, which is about to really hit the fan this coming week. Until that time, y'all take care. Norm away. Like the video gamers? We have more such wonders to show you, and all you have to do is subscribe and hit the notifications button.
I mean, you don't have to.
Also, consider becoming a patron by following the link to our Patreon page, where we turn your cash into videos, comics, and games using the darkest of dark magics.
But mostly just cash.